Hello, my name is Stephen Davis, and I'm happy to be part of this 132nd anniversary of Live Oak Church in Vance, South Carolina documentary. The continued support and service of Live Oak Church to the community of Vance and extended family beyond is so much appreciated. Yes, I am directly related to the Stephen Davis in the graveyard maintained by Live Oak Church. He was my great-grandfather. As a matter of fact, many of my relatives on my father's side of my family are buried there. My first visit to Live Oak Church was to eulogize my step-grandfather on my mother's side, but he was also my father's cousin, Daniel Joseph. In 2019, I wrote a play entitled When the Break Happened in Orangeburg County. And talking about my father's family, I highlighted the families of the Davises, the Holmans, and the Josephs. It is my pleasure to introduce members of those families now to share some knowledge of personal connections and experiences with Live Oak Church. My wonderful guests today are Lois Davis Reed, Stephen Davis, who are the grandchildren of Stephen Davis, Clarence Holman, son of Samson Holman, who is, as you all well know, buried in the back of the church. Welcome you all to this video for the anniversary of Live Oak Church. I want to start off with, Lois, actually, because Lois probably have the greatest knowledge of some of the inner workings of Live Oak Church back in the day. How are you doing, Lois? And what are some of your recollections?
I'm doing very well. I can remember as far back as going there as a youngster, and I also remember Grandpa Stephen's funeral at Live Oak.
Okay.
Yes, because I was there, and I remember all my aunts and uncles and all the family members at that funeral, because I remember my grandfather very well. I think I'm the only one of Daddy's children who really knew him. So that goes way back to that. And I grew up in that church, went to Sunday school when we could, because we lived far away and we didn't have the transportation. Sometimes we went by wagon with the mule. Other times we went with Uncle Andrew, who had the truck. And then other times we went with another member of the church that lived in our community, Mr. Van Oliver, who used to take us to church on Sundays. So we were there for Sunday school, we were there for services. We were also, they used to have afternoon services a lot of times, and then they would have food. We would stay, we would be in church all day. And I do remember the minister that did Live Oak was also the minister of the church on Rock Hill, AME Zion Church. So he would come to Live Oak on the first and third Sundays and go to the other church on the second and fourth Sundays. I remember Reverend Hamilton. I'm just trying my best to remember the others, and I know who would have remembered, but she's gone, was my sister Gloria. So I cannot, I've been trying ever since my brother told me this to remember some of the other ministers, but I do remember Reverend Hamilton.
Okay.
And so that's how it started. And when I was growing up, we always had that. The pastor was the minister of the two churches. So 2 Sundays a month, they would be at Live Oak, and the other 2 Sundays, they would be at the other church in the area. But I remember a lot of things that we had, We had choirs, we had young people, and the church was full of people at that time, really full. So I remember all the older people. I remember Uncle Bubba Morsa. I remember the Josephs, women Josephs. I remember all those people, and Baby and Kanshuk, all of them, I remember. They were the Davis side of the family. It was my grandfather's cousin. My father's cousins was related to Grandpa Stephen. So we had really good times. And my mother would always make sure that we got to church. And we would go to church those 2 Sundays. And then the other Sundays, we would attend local churches close by in our area. But then that's where I joined Live Oak when I was about 13. And I was a member there until I came to, and then I joined the Mount Holbamy Zion Church with Aunt Lucille, who was living in New York, White Plains at that time. So I do have good memories of Live Oak. And I also remember about the cemetery and all the people that I saw the names of all the Holmans and all the other people that were there. And I do remember each spring and summer, we would go up and clean up our family graves because that's how it was done back then. Each family member had to go and do their own family graves. But now they do it to send something to them every year to help with that cleanup. But back then, that's how it was. We had to go, each family had to do it themselves. So that I remember. I know that we always went to church. And I do remember Mr. Van Oliver, most of the time, that's who we went to church with. I do remember going in the wagon with the mules. I do remember Uncle Andrew taking us, because Aunt Belle belonged to Live Oak, and Aunt Belle belonged to Live Oak at that time. So Uncle Andrew would take us, and then he would go on to First Baptist, and then he would come back and pick us up and take us back home. And I remember a lot of the people that I grew up with there, a lot of the older people, and we had a lot of young people, and beautiful choirs of the young people and the older people. So that's my memory. And I know Live Oak was a white church at that time, sitting up on this red hill. It is now a brick church. So when we go home, we always go and walk through the cemetery and look at all the tombstones of our family members.
I'm going to ask you some other questions a little bit later on, but
Yeah.
I want to get to Clarence from a different perspective, because you did not really go to Live Oak, but you have a connection to Live Oak. What's your connection?
Yes.
My connections with Live Oak is through my father's side of the family. My father was Samson Holman. His father was Glover Holman. And his mother was Diana Holman. They lived only about 2 or 3 miles from the church, as I recall. It wasn't too far at all, because I could remember us going there on numerous occasions. But my recollection of Live Oak is primarily with the cemetery. That's because my father's family, for the most part, is buried there at Live Oak. And so is my mother. And I remember my first time I remember going to Live Oak was my Uncle Jake's funeral. And he was the last of the siblings who stayed there on the family property. And I think he died around 1948, 49, thereabout, that general time frame. And that was the first time I remember going to the cemetery there. We had made many trips to Vance, where they live, but not to the church itself. And I do, whenever I go that way, I do go by the cemetery regularly. And each time I go, I think they put a lot of work here and cleaning up the cemetery and keeping it looking good, because there had been a time when the upkeep wasn't as good as it is now. But I can go there now. I know exactly where my father and my mother are buried. I know where my grandfather Glover's buried. His sister, his other children are there. Aunt Rosa, Uncle Manzi, Uncle Jake, all of them are there. And I go as often as possible to stop by and I visit, because it just has an attachment and it draws me there. And when I go on 95, I get off at the Santee exit off of 95, and I go by the cemetery. And it brings back a lot of memories of my family members. And I just enjoy going there. And I am thankful for the church for keeping the cemetery looking the way it does.
Stephen, I want to get to you now, but I want to say before that, the last time I was in Live Oak, I was walking in the back with one of my cousins, who is Benny Cold Call. And we're walking in the back of the cemetery, and I fell in front of the grave of Eliza Holman and Julia Holman. And I said, oh no, this is not the way I'm going, am I? Are they pulling me down here?
They want you to take notice.
Take note.
So, Stephen, tell me what your experiences in terms of Live Oak and Vance. And
My experience was very limited because, as Lois said, it was during the time when she and Laura, they would go as young teenagers.
Yes.
So, of course, I was younger still. But I do remember traveling to and from the church, as Lois said, with family members, Aunt Belle's husband, Uncle Andrew, and Mr. Van Oliver. And the other times, Daddy in that wagon with the mule, and up to Live Oak we went. The first, and I believe, well, the only minister I recall from that time was Reverend Johnson. And I don't recall when he left or whatever, but I know that once we moved from the farm and moved further away, and without the transportation provided by others, and we didn't have a car at that time, so getting there was quite difficult. And of course, there were other issues involved, but it was limited for me, quite limited.
Clarence, it seems to me that on the incorporation of the church or the formation of the church, Glover Holman's name was one of the ones that was used. He was one of the ones that incorporated the church.
I don't know a lot about that, but I think you are correct. I think Live Oak was a branch from a church up in Ellery.
Yes.
And I think that I don't know what all happened and how it happened, but I do know that they came out of Ellery because they used to try to attend church in Ellery. Then they tried to move closer, and that's when Live Oak was established. But I don't have all the details on that.
Yeah, but I think that once that might be the church that Lois was talking about when they were going back and forth every other Sunday. The minister was because the church that our relatives were initially going to was I guess a fairly large church, but it was at the northern end of the territory, and the people from the southern end said, hey, we need something that's closer to us. And that's how Live Oak was formed, in my knowledge. Now, in this documentary, it might tell us something different, and then we'll learn from that. But that's my recollection of it. Now, I also want to get to how, Clarence, you and actually Stephen, Lois, and I are related.
Well, my grandfather and grandmother had about 10 or 11 children. One of them was Liza. Liza married Stephen Davis. They had, I think, around 4 children.
No.
Together. Huh?
That's
I
it.
think, but Eliza passed away in 1913, and Stephen Davis remarried. But Lois's family are related to us through Glover Davis. Her father was a child of my aunt. And I think
that's all of us.
And that's how you came in also, because I think your grandfather was a son of Stephen Davis, as I recall, I think.
No, my grandmother, Gladys.
Gladys.
That's your grandmother. You're right. Your grandmother. Yes. Yes. And
She was the last child that Eliza had.
yes,
And
Yeah.
I always wondered whether she died because of the childbirth, because they were so close together.
My father always told us, and Gladys was, I think, a few months old, maybe 5 or 6 months old when his mother died.
Mm.
Daddy told us that.
Okay.
She didn't give birth, but she left a young baby when she did die. And that was in Gladys.
My
Daddy-
grandmother then was taken by Clarence. Your grandmother took her.
That's right.
That's
Yes.
your father and my grandmother grew up together.
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Although he was 10 years older than her.
yes, yes.
And the interesting thing is that
Dinah
Live Oak was part of that whole nexus of people that were living in the community, and most of them were our families.
Mhm.
Any other recollections, Lois, that you want to add to it?
I know how the connections are, that how we're all related. I do know what my father told us about his mother and all the other uncles and aunts of his. But as far as anything else at the church, like Clarence said about the cemetery, it does hold a lot of memories for all of us, because if you go there, you see a lot of relatives, the
Oh,
Holmans,
yes.
the Davises, all of our relatives. So when we go, we just go from one to the other, looking at them and remembering them. And I do remember Clarence Snow's father. We call him Uncle Shug. I do remember Uncle Manzi. I
Yeah.
do remember Uncle Pat, which we call him Mrs. Glover, because when he came to visit, he would always come and visit us.
Yes.
And of course, Jacob, who's Uncle Bob Morse, was the one that we knew the best, because he was at Live Oak and he was always there. So I remember him very well. And then I remember Clarence's father, and those used to come to visit us. I remember that too, when we were growing up.
Absolutely.
So, and at Rosie,
Yes.
Uncle Shug, yes. Well, we always call him Uncle Shug. I know his name is Samson,
Yes.
but that's what we called him. And so I have all those memories. It's just, and it's all connected. They're all connected from Live Oak, the church Live Oak, where the family was. And even my grandfather, there are not a lot of family members that I know on his side from Live Oak, but we know that he had some cousins there, the Davises, the other Davises, which was Shug and whatever, whoever they were. So those are my memories of Live Oak and growing up there.
You know, and I would like to add, if it may not be part of the documentary, but after Uncle Jake passed away, all of our visits in that area was to Utahville.
Yes.
At his parents' house. So
Yeah.
I remember going there a number of occasions.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, you know, I have some fond memories of visiting them. So
Yeah.
that's where we went when we went up in that area.
Mhm.
We would go to Holly Hill, but we always went to Utahville.
Yes.
I want to say this because we were going to be joined by Reverend Ralph Brown, but evidently he still could not get away. He is part of the Joseph family,
Mhm.
and the Joseph family is also part of the Davis family. Stephen Davis's mother was a Joseph. So, and her brother, who is buried there in the church, was Lemon Joseph.
Mhm.
And then Lemon Joseph had other family members that were part of the church. And then actually some of them came to live from New York in the Vance area, and they died and they are buried in the church, which would include Franklin Joseph, who is Reverend Ralph Brown's grandfather. So I want to do a shout out to all the Josephs and let them know that, hey, we are family. And if we don't know you, we really would like to know you, but it's all connected to Live Oak. Live Oak is the repository of all of our memories in terms of ancestors, because that's where they were from. And the one thing about the Joseph family is Sam Joseph, who was Lemon Joseph's father, was from Trinidad. He had to be a very strong man to have gone through all the things that he went through in terms of slavery. Toast him also, as we do all of the rest of our family. And he's represented by Lemon Joseph and the other Josephs being in the backyard of Live Oak. And we thank you all in terms of being part of this documentary, and we're looking forward to it when it comes out. That's our contribution.